This week, alleged CEO killer Luigi Mangione is back in court. Plus, an NYPD detective shot while executing a search warrant. And
just like what you have to do. Do what you have to do, honestly.
A Brooklyn McDonald's begins carding teenagers to curb violent incidents. Right now, Fox 5's Crime in the City. For our first story this week, we begin in Lower Manhattan. That's where Luigi Mangione, the 26-year-old accused of stalking and killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson outside a Midtown Manhattan hotel in December, made his first court appearance since his dramatic arraignment.
CEO shooter Luigi Mangione back in court today, wearing a bulletproof vest and with his arms and legs shackled.
His lawyer attempted to delay motion filings, but the judge denied the request. Fox 5's Michelle Ross was in courtroom watching it all play out. Quite the scene, Michelle.
Absolutely, Natasha and Steve. Now, one of the reasons why Karen Friedman-Agnifilo wanted to delay the next steps is because she says she and her legal team hadn't received all of the evidence yet from prosecutors. Another reason being that they're still working through the death penalty weighing over Mangione in his federal case. Now, separately, she's also upset because she says that she has limited access to her client. Now, we were in state court today, and the state court case will be heard first, but she says he's in federal custody. In a bulletproof vest, Luigi Mangione walks into the courtroom with his wrists and ankles shackled. Mangione spent the entirety of Friday's hearing in the getup, despite his lawyer's request to remove the shackles. The judge denied.
I don't understand what this show of danger is for. When I go visit Luigi at MDC in Brooklyn, I sit with him. He is unshackled. He walks around freely in the visiting area. We sit in a room together without law enforcement hovering over us.
Friedman-Agnifilo tried to delay motion filings while prosecutors decide if they're seeking the death penalty against Mangione in his federal case. Judge Gregory Caro denied the request and set deadlines for later this spring and summer. More than 100 people, mostly women, were in the courtroom hallway in support of Mangione. But the 26-year-old defendant isn't the only one with support. They cheered and applauded for Friedman-Agnifilo as she walked by. His lawyer also objected to setting a motion schedule because the legal team had not received all the evidence yet. Evidence that was discussed in a new HBO documentary in which she slammed the mayor and NYPD for participating.
This week on HBO, in a documentary, I see the chief of detectives and the New York City mayor, full hair and makeup done, sitting down and giving an interview for television and talking about the evidence in Luigi's case, talking about police paperwork that we don't have, talking about forensics that we have not yet received.
And in addition to Mangione supporters inside the courthouse, there were dozens of supporters outside the courthouse. And one thing they were chanting was, "We the people want Luigi free." Now, his attorney, Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, she also discussed in the courtroom how police in Pennsylvania may have violated Mangione's constitutional rights during their search and seizure. They mentioned that they were able to recover a gun from his bag. That's something that they're looking into and that they plan on fighting against. Now, Mangione's next court case is in federal court right around the block here next month.
We now head to Bayside, Queens. That's where officers shot and killed an armed man right in front of the police precinct. They say the gunman, a 79-year-old man, pointed his weapon at the officer and refused to drop it.
NYPD officers shoot and kill an armed man right in front of the police precinct in Bayside, Queens.
They say the gunman, a 79-year-old man, pointed his weapon at an officer, refusing to drop it. Fox 6's Arthur Sheehan is at the precinct where the NYPD just gave an update. Arthur.
Steve, Natasha, this is the 111th Precinct Station House in Bayside, Queens. This is normally a very peaceful neighborhood, but shots rang out earlier this evening, disturbing that peace. And since then, the block in front of the police precinct itself is the actual crime scene here. Now, officials tell us that it was sometime around 6:40 this evening that the 79-year-old man pulled up in a vehicle and approached the front of the precinct. There was an officer who was posted outside, as it is his job to guard the front of the police precinct, and we're told they They engaged in conversation, and at some point during that conversation, the police tell us the 79-year-old pulled out a handgun that we have a picture of and that we will be showing you. Now, as that conversation must have been escalating, other police officers came out of the precinct and tried to get the guy to drop his weapon. Officials say he did not, and that's when all 4 police officers outside opened fire. The 79-year-old was rushed to a hospital where he was pronounced dead. The 4 officers are being treated for minor injuries, including tinnitus. And just a short time ago, officials described exactly what happened when the confrontation started.
The male suddenly displayed a firearm and pointed it at the officer. The officer gave verbal commands for the male to put down the firearm and radioed for assistance. Additional officers approached and gave additional verbal commands to drop the firearm, but he did not comply and continued to point it at our officer. After the de-escalation techniques were unsuccessful, 4 officers discharged their firearms. The male was struck numerous times.
Police have released a photo of the weapon that they have recovered here at the scene. They say it's a .38 caliber handgun, and it was fully loaded, and that the 79-year-old did not fire a shot. Police tell us, or sources in the police department tell us, that the 79-year-old is not from the city. He's from Great Neck, Long Island. They're looking into motive, of course. One of the motives that they're looking into is whether or not he came here with the exact purpose of being killed, a dynamic that's often referred to as suicide by cop. But the investigation's just begun. The 79-year-old is dead, and the officers are being treated for minor injuries.
Down on the Lower East Side, an NYPD detective was shot while executing a search warrant. Police say the suspect was a convicted felon with multiple priors for gun possession and narcotics.
Fox 5's Lisa Evers is live from the crime scene. Lisa, what can you tell us?
Well, Stephen, Natasha, it was a terrifying scene here early this morning at NYCHA's Laddick houses for residents as a suspect fired a weapon outside his door, fired shots right there into the hallway. NYPD detectives were attempting to search a search warrant. More shots were fired and a tense standoff ensued. This went on for about 3.5 hours. A veteran ESU detective was shot and wounded. Now it all unfolded about 5 a.m. as the police tried to serve a warrant on Edwin Rivera. When they knocked on his door, parolee Rivera responded with gunfire, then barricaded himself behind the door and refused to come out. A hostage negotiator was called in. They tried to talk him into coming out. Hours later, he opened the door and fired at the officers again, striking the ESU detective in his shoulder. Officers returned fire. The suspect was wounded. Here's what a local leader and NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch had to say.
There was a lot of screaming and yelling and emotions. Like I said, out here, you have a whole court of people, right, who were out here. There was a lot of emotions, a lot of neighbors who knew him. His sibling was out here.
So the real question here is this. Why was this individual out of jail and in a position to shoot our officers? How is the system set up to allow one person to commit multiple violent offenses while out on parole with no consequences? I ask our elected officials up in Albany, our DAs, and our judges, what are you doing here? We should never have had to be at that door this morning. We should never have had a cop shot today. Blessedly, our officer will be going home to his family, and we are all incredibly grateful for that.
Now, we're told that the NYPD officer has returned home. His injury was non-life-threatening. Same thing with the suspect. The police commissioner asking over and over again, as she has on previous occasions, why was this individual out on the streets in the first place?
A McDonald's location in Flatbush has introduced a new and controversial policy. No one under 20 years old can enter without an adult. The rule was implemented after a surge in violent incidents and 911 calls, leading the owner to increase security and enforce an ID check at the door.
Thanks. Many teens like to hang out after school, but now one McDonald's in Brooklyn is barring anyone under the age of 20 from entering their restaurant without an accompanying adult.
A sign went up on the door announcing the policy change last week, and as Fox Eye's Arthur Sheehan explains, it comes after several incidents at that location.
Most retailers look for ways to increase foot traffic, but the McDonald's at 2154 Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn is doing the opposite. As the sign on the door shows, anyone under 20 needs an ID or a parent to get in.
This sucks.
While some dislike the new door policy being enforced by a trio of security guards and backed up by NYPD officers outside, the reasoning is plain. McDonald's locations are all too often the scene of violent crimes, and both the victims and perpetrators can often be young. Those who patronize this location themselves have seen issues. What have you seen happening?
They jump the security guard, the Grubhub guy, fights, jumps.
They be like blocking the doorway, blocking the ATM machine.
Some point out the children need a place to congregate and after-school options. And locals tell Fox 5 a new recreation center should be opening soon. But NYPD stats show without it, there have already been nearly 30 911 calls to this location in this young year, which is set to exceed the past 3 years, during which more than 100 911 calls were made for this location every year. And with that, the new door policy has its fans.
I would suggest they keep up with the IDing people. Honestly, I feel like that's the best, and it's just like what you have to do. Do what you have to do, honestly.
While this McDonald's is making waves because it's the first one we know of in the city that's doing this, some people out here say they would support other retailers if they decide to do the same.
I would be supportive because they're a bother. They don't know how to behave.
A feeling that may make the door policy at this McDonald's food for thought for other retailers in the city.
Up on the Upper East Side, a 28-year-old woman was slashed with a box cutter inside a subway station. Police are searching as well for a suspect accused of slashing a woman in the face on the Upper East Side. Now, this happened inside the 86th Street station. Investigators say the suspect approached a 28-year-old woman. That happened on Monday and slashed her across the left cheek and right eyebrow with a box cutter. The victim was taken to an area hospital in stable condition. If you have any information, you're asked to call Crime Stoppers. If you don't know that number, it's 1-800-577-TIPS. And finally, we end on Long Island, where alleged Gilgo Beach serial killer Rex Heuermann was back in court for a hearing on DNA evidence.
Breaking news now at first. Accused Gilgo Beach serial killer Rex Heuermann back in a Long Island courtroom today as we learn more about the next steps in his highly anticipated trial. Fox 5's Michelle Ross joins us live from Riverhead with the details just out of court. Michelle, what have you learned?
Bianca, this case continues to drag out. Not much has changed since the last court appearance last month. But what the defense continues to ask for is to sever the trial. They want to separate this trial into at least 3 separate trials, grouping certain victims together. The prosecution, on the other hand, of course, opposes this. Now, what we're also waiting to hear for is a hearing date, a court date set for the Fry hearing, which essentially would determine if certain DNA evidence would be admissible in court. Now, Rex Heuermann was seen today in court this morning, the Suffolk County courtroom, wearing a dark-colored suit, red tie, and white shirt with his hands cuffed behind him. He's facing murder charges for the deaths of 7 women. His defense team is claiming they need more evidence from the DA's office, and the prosecution agreed to hand it over, but it's just taking an extremely long time. The defense says it's taken about 8 days so far for data to download onto a hard drive from a company on the West Coast, and it's only about 40% through despite downloading 24/7. Now, this should be done by the next court date next month on whether this specific DNA evidence can be used during the trial that allegedly links Heuermann's stray hairs on the victims' bodies. This would be the first time this type of DNA would be used in a New York State courtroom. The defense says it's new and defective. The DA says it's been used to identify 9/11 victims.
This science has been around for many years, and if the defense wants to call it magic, that's fine. The defense could call it whatever it likes, but we will determine that at the hearing. We look forward to that hearing, and I can tell you this is sound science. It is the future of DNA analysis, both in New York State and in this country.
This is novel information. They call it science. We're disputing that. So we're looking forward to getting things that we are entitled to in order to prepare and conduct this Fry hearing. So we've been on this for a year and a half. Astria on the West Coast has been on this well before that, and we're still waiting for significant portions of discovery that we're entitled to.
The next court date has been set for March 12th. This is when we're expecting the judge to set a date for the Fry hearing regarding that DNA evidence.
That's this week's Crime in the City. Subscribe for more at youtube.com/Fox5NY.